the Axeman of New Orleans. In the sultry, jazz-soaked nights of New Orleans in 1918, a phantom emerged from the shadows, wielding an axe and a straight razor with a precision that chilled the soul. He was known only as the Axeman, a faceless specter whose identity remains one of America's most enduring mysteries. His reign of terror, spanning from May 1918 to October 1919, left a trail of blood and fear that gripped the Crescent City, a place already pulsing with the vibrant chaos of its multicultural heart. The Axeman's blade did not discriminate. Men, women, even children fell beneath its weight. But his targets shared a chilling commonality. Most were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, many of them grocers eking out a living in the city's bustling, tight-knit neighborhoods. The question that haunted the city then, and lingers still, is why? Was this a sadistic predator driven by a personal vendetta, a twisted psyche, or something far darker, perhaps a cog in the sinister machinery of the New Orleans underworld, the shadowy Cosa Nostra known as the Black Hand? The truth, like the Axeman himself, remains elusive, cloaked in the fog of history and the terror of those who lived under his invisible gaze. New Orleans in the early 20th century was a cauldron of cultures, a city where the sultry notes of jazz mingled with the cries of street vendors and the whispers of voodoo priestesses. The Mississippi River carried wealth and wanderers to its ports, but it also brought tension, racial, ethnic, and economic. Italian immigrants, particularly Sicilians, had poured into the city since the 1890s, carving out modest lives as grocers, barbers, and laborers. They clustered in neighborhoods like the French Quarter and Uptown, their corner stores becoming the lifeblood of their communities. But prosperity bred resentment. The Sicilians' industriousness made them targets of envy and suspicion, their success seen as a threat by some. The city's darker corners pulsed with the influence of the Black Hand, a mafia faction notorious for extorting these same immigrant businesses. Protection money, threats, and bombings were not uncommon, and the 1890 lynching of 11 Sicilians after the murder of Police Chief David Hennessy had left a scar on the Italian community, a reminder of their precarious place in this new world. It was into this volatile atmosphere that the Axeman stepped, a figure as intangible as the swamp mist, yet as real as the blood he spilled. No one saw his face, or if they did not live to describe it. Survivors spoke of a hulking shadow, a large man, sometimes dark-skinned, sometimes not, wearing a slouched hat or a dark suit, vanishing into the night like a wraith. His method was as consistent as it was horrifying. He would chisel a panel from a back door, slip inside, and use an axe, often the victim's own, to deliver brutal, skull-crushing blows. Sometimes a razor slashed throats, leaving victims choking on their own blood. He took no valuables, only lives, leaving behind a scene of carnage that seemed to revel in its own brutality. The lack of theft fueled speculation about his motives. Was he a lone madman, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as retired Detective John D'Antonio suggested, a seemingly normal citizen overtaken by an urge to kill? Or was he a tool of the Black Hand, targeting Italian grocers who refused to pay? The Mafia's presence in New Orleans was undeniable, and the Axeman's focus on Italians led many to whisper of mob ties, of vendettas cloaked in the guise of random slaughter. The city's Italian community lived in dread, their small grocery stores, symbols of their hard-won success, transformed into potential death traps. Each creak of a floorboard, each flicker of a street lamp, became a harbinger of doom. The Axeman's attacks were not just murders, they were invasions of the sanctity of home, a violation that left survivors and neighbors paralyzed with fear. The newspapers, particularly the Times-Picayune, fanned the flames of panic with lurid headlines and speculative tales, some hinting at supernatural forces, others at organized crime. The Black Hand, with its reputation for blackmail and violence, was an easy scapegoat, yet no evidence ever surfaced to confirm their involvement. Another theory, bizarre yet persistent, suggested the Axeman was a jazz enthusiast, a notion born from a chilling letter he allegedly sent in March 1919, promising to spare those who played jazz music. Was this a sadistic jest, a marketing ploy by a local musician, or a glimpse into a warped mind that saw murder as a twisted tribute to the city's soulful sound? The Axeman's preference for Italian victims fueled theories of ethnic hatred. New Orleans was no stranger to xenophobia. The 1890 lynching had exposed the city's undercurrent of anti-Italian sentiment. Some speculated the killer was a white working-class man in his 30s, driven by resentment toward the industrious immigrants who were reshaping the city's economic landscape. Others saw a sexual motive, with criminologists like Colin and Damon Wilson suggesting the Axeman targeted women, killing men only when they stood in his way. The brutality of the attacks, skulls shattered, throats slit, hinted at a rage that went beyond mere prejudice, a sadistic pleasure in the act of killing. Yet the Axeman left no clear manifesto, no definitive clue, only a trail of blood and a city gripped by paranoia. Picture the scene: a humid New Orleans night, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and the distant wail of a trumpet. In the Italian Quarter, families huddle in their homes above their grocery stores, doors bolted, shotguns at the ready. Every shadow seems to move. Every rustle carries the weight of death. The Axeman, invisible yet omnipresent, stalks the streets, his axe gleaming under the gaslight. Was he a ghost, as his letter claimed, a demon from the hottest hell? Or was he a man, perhaps one of the very neighbors who shared their bread, hiding a monstrous hunger behind a familiar face? The possibility of mob ties added another layer of terror. Could the killer be part of a larger conspiracy, a hired blade of the Black Hand, punishing those who defied the mafia's grip? The lack of answers only deepened the fear, turning every stranger into a suspect, every dark alley into a portal to hell. The Axeman's anonymity made him all the more terrifying. He was not a man but a myth, a boogeyman who could be anywhere anyone. The Italian grocers, men like Joseph Maggio and Charles Cortimiglia, were not just victims, but symbols of a community under siege, their dreams of a better life in America stained with blood. The city's collective imagination ran wild. Was he a vengeful spirit, a mafia enforcer, or a psychopath cloaked in the chaos of a city teetering on the edge of modernity? The Axeman's motives, ethnic hatred, mob retribution, or something unfathomably personal, remained as opaque as the bayou's murky waters, leaving New Orleans to grapple with a terror that was both intimately close and impossibly distant. The streets of New Orleans in 1918 pulsed with a sultry, dangerous rhythm, where the wail of a saxophone could drown out a scream, and the flicker of gaslights cast shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The city, an intoxicating blend of Creole charm and raw ambition, was no stranger to vice or violence, but nothing could have prepared it for the Axeman's reign of terror. From May 1918 to October 1919, his axe carved a bloody path through the Italian neighborhoods, turning corner grocery stores into charnel houses and transforming the city's sultry nights into a fever dream of fear. Each murder was a crescendo in a symphony of horror, each victim a note in a melody that held New Orleans in a chokehold of dread. The Axeman's blade was relentless, his presence a whisper in the dark, and as the body count rose, so did the city's primal, intoxicating panic, a fear so palpable it clung to the skin, like the humid Louisiana air. The terror began on May 23, 1918, in the heart of the Italian Quarter at the corner of Upperline and Magnolia Streets. Joseph Maggio, a grocer with a thick Sicilian accent and a kind smile, and his wife Catherine lay in their bed above their modest store. The night was heavy with the scent of jasmine and the distant hum of a jazz band when the Axeman struck. He chiseled a panel from their back door with surgical precision, slipped inside, and unleashed hell. Joseph's throat was slashed with a straight razor, the blade biting so deep it nearly severed his head, blood pooling like dark wine on the sheets. Catherine, her skull shattered by an axe, lay beside him, her nightgown stained crimson, her eyes frozen in a final, silent scream. The killer left no fingerprints, no footprints, only a discarded razor and an axe, both slick with blood, mocking the police with their mute presence. The neighborhood awoke to a scene that seared itself into their collective memory, a tableau of gore that whispered of a predator who savored his work. The city barely had time to catch its breath before the Axeman struck again, his hunger insatiable. On June 27, 1918, Louis Bessumer, a Polish grocer, and his mistress Harriet Lowe were found in their home on Dorgenwa Street, their heads split open by an axe's brutal kiss. Blood dripped from the ceiling, pooling on the floor in a grotesque parody of intimacy. Harriet, her face a ruin of flesh and bone, survived long enough to stagger into the street, her screams piercing the dawn. She spoke of a mulatto man lurking in the shadows, but her words were fevered, unreliable, and the police dismissed them as delirium. Lewis, dazed and bloodied, claimed no memory of the attack, his story as slippery as the bayou's surface. The press devoured the scandal. Harriet's status as a mistress added a lurid edge to the tale, and whispers of infidelity swirled, but the Axeman cared little for gossip. His blade was his only confession, and it spoke in rivers of red. By August, the city was a tinderbox of fear, and the Axeman lit the match. On August 5, 1918, Mary Schneider, a pregnant woman living on Elm Street, awoke to a shadow looming over her bed. The axe fell with merciless force, splitting her scalp and leaving her unconscious in a pool of her own blood. Miraculously, she survived, giving birth to a healthy daughter days later, but her survival only deepened the mystery. Why had the Axeman spared her? Was it mercy, or had he been interrupted? The city's imagination ran wild, each theory more lurid than the last. Some whispered of a demon who fed on fear, others of a killer who relished the chaos he sowed. The Italian grocers, in particular, felt the weight of his gaze, their stores marked as if by an invisible hand. Barricades went up, shotguns were loaded, and prayers were whispered in Sicilian. But the Axeman was a ghost, slipping through locked doors and bolted shutters with ease. The attacks escalated, each one more brazen, more intimate. On March 10, 1919, across the river in Gretna, Charles Cortimiglia and his wife Rosie were targeted in their home above their grocery. Their 2-year-old daughter Mary lay between them, a cherubic shield against the darkness. The Axeman cared not for innocence. His axe fell on Charles and Rosie, shattering their skulls, while little Mary's tiny body was cleaved with a single savage blow. The child's death sent shockwaves through New Orleans, a city that thought it had seen the depths of depravity. Rosie, clinging to life, accused neighbors Frank and Iolanda Giordano, claiming they were the killers, but her story unraveled under scrutiny, tainted by grief and pain. The Giordanos were arrested, then released, their innocence a bitter footnote in a case that offered no answers. The Axeman's cruelty seemed to revel in its randomness, yet his focus on Italians, grocers like Joseph Romano, attacked on August 10, 1918, and Steve Boca, struck on August 10, 1919, suggested a pattern, a vendetta that whispered of deeper, darker motives. The city's fear was a living thing, a seductive, suffocating force that wrapped itself around every heart. Night after night, New Orleans held its breath, waiting for the next scream, the next blood-soaked headline. The Times-Picayune fueled the hysteria, printing grisly details and wild theories. Was the Axeman a voodoo priest, a jazz-crazed lunatic, or a mafia enforcer settling scores? The Italian community, already scarred by the 1890 lynching, saw enemies in every shadow. Rumors of the Black Hand swirled, their extortion rackets a grim backdrop to the murders. Had these grocers refused to pay, marking their homes for slaughter? Or was the Axeman a lone wolf, his motives as inscrutable as the bayou's depths? The lack of theft, wallets untouched, cash registers ignored, only deepened the enigma, suggesting a killer driven by something more primal than greed. The tension reached its zenith on March 14, 1919, when a letter, purportedly from the Axeman himself, arrived at the Times-Picayune. Written in a florid, mocking tone, it declared, "I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell." The letter promised a citywide slaughter at 15 minutes past midnight on March 19, 1919, but offered a bizarre reprieve. Any home playing jazz music would be spared. The city erupted in a frenzy of sound, jazz bands blaring from every saloon, phonographs spinning in every home, the notes a desperate shield against the unseen blade. That night, New Orleans was a cacophony of defiance, a sultry, defiant dance with death. No murders occurred, but the letter's impact lingered, a taunting reminder of the Axeman's power. Was it a genuine missive, or a cruel hoax by a local musician boosting jazz's popularity? The truth was as elusive as the killer himself. As the attacks continued, Sarah Lawman in September 1919, Mike Pepitone in October, the city's fear morphed into a collective obsession. Each murder was a crescendo, each survival a fleeting resolution that only heightened the dread. Barricades failed, vigilance waned, and the Axeman's shadow grew longer, his presence a seductive terror that both repelled and fascinated. New Orleans was a city under siege, its people caught in a dance of fear and fascination, their nights haunted by the clink of an axe against a door, their days consumed by whispers of the next strike. The Axeman had become more than a man. He was a myth, a specter who fed on the city's soul, leaving behind a legacy of blood and unanswered questions. In the sweltering summer of 1918, New Orleans was a city under siege, its sultry nights pierced by screams and its days choked with dread. The Axeman, a shadow with a bloodied blade, had turned the Crescent City's Italian neighborhoods into a hunting ground, his axe carving terror into the hearts of grocers and their families. The police, led by Superintendent Frank T. Mooney, were not just fighting a killer, but a phantom, one who slipped through locked doors, left no fingerprints, and vanished into the humid haze of the bayou. The pursuit of the Axeman was a dance with darkness, a chase that pulsed with desperation, frustration, and a seductive, maddening allure. Every lead was a whisper of hope, every dead end a taunt from a killer who seemed to mock the very notion of justice. As the body count rose and the city's fear tightened its grip, the police scrambled to catch a specter who was always one step ahead, his laughter echoing in the clink of an axe against a door. The investigation began in the blood-soaked aftermath of the first murder, on May 23, 1918, when Joseph and Catherine Maggio were found butchered in their home above their grocery on Upper Street. The New Orleans police, accustomed to barroom brawls and petty theft, were woefully unprepared for a killer of this caliber. Their forensic tools were primitive. No fingerprint databases, no blood typing, just a magnifying glass and a prayer. The crime scene offered little: a razor, an axe, both slick with blood, and a chiseled door panel that hinted at the killer's methodical entry. Detectives combed the scene, their boots sticking to the bloodied floor, but found no witnesses, no footprints, only the oppressive weight of a city watching their every move. The press, led by the Times-Picayune, was relentless, their headlines screaming of a fiend who struck under the cover of night. The police, under pressure from a panicked public, chased shadows. Every Italian grocer's grudge, every neighbor's whisper became a lead, but none led to the Axeman. The second attack, on June 27, 1918, at Louis Bessumer's home, pushed the investigation into overdrive. Bessumer and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, survived, their bloodied faces a grotesque testament to the Axeman's brutality. Harriet's fevered claim of a mulatto man sent detectives scouring the city's mixed-race neighborhoods, their heavy-handed tactics stirring resentment. But her story crumbled under scrutiny, her words slurred by pain and laudanum. Bessumer, cagey and uncooperative, offered nothing but shrugs, his Polish accent thick with defiance. The police, grasping at straws, arrested a bakery deliveryman, John Zanka, whose wagon was seen near the crime scene. His alibi was ironclad, his demeanor nervous but innocent, and he was released, leaving the detectives with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. The Axeman, it seemed, was a ghost who thrived on their missteps, his blade gleaming in the moonlight as he slipped away. By August, the city was a powder keg, and the police were running on fumes. The attack on Mary Schneider, a pregnant woman who survived a skull-crushing blow, added a new layer of urgency. Superintendent Mooney, his face etched with exhaustion, doubled patrols in the Italian Quarter, their boots pounding the cobblestones of Magazine and Chapatula streets. Officers stood guard outside grocery stores, their revolvers cold comfort against a killer who struck in the dead of night. The community, gripped by paranoia, turned on itself. Neighbors accused neighbors, and old grudges became deadly suspicions. The police followed every tip, no matter how outlandish. A voodoo priestess in the Treme, a jazz musician with a shady past, even a disgruntled customer who'd argued with Joseph Romano, another victim. Each lead fizzled, each suspect cleared, and the Axeman's shadow grew longer, his evasion a taunting ballet that left the police stumbling in the dark. The tension reached a fever pitch with the March 10, 1919, attack on the Cortimiglia family in Gretna. Charles and Rosie Cortimiglia were left for dead, their 2-year-old daughter, Mary, slaughtered in her crib. Rosie's accusation against neighbors Frank and Iolanda Giordano sent shockwaves through the investigation. The police, desperate for a break, arrested the Giordanos, their Italian heritage making them easy scapegoats in a city rife with anti-Sicilian sentiment. The trial was a circus, the courtroom thick with the scent of sweat and fear. Rosie's testimony, delivered through tears and morphine, was compelling but shaky. She'd seen the Giordanos, she claimed, wielding the axe. Yet no physical evidence linked them to the crime, and their motive, a supposed business rivalry, was flimsy at best. The police, under pressure to deliver, clung to the arrest, but doubts gnawed at them. The Axeman's signature, chiseling door panels, using the victim's own axe, was absent in the Giordano's narrative, and the case began to unravel like a cheap suit. Then came the letter, a chilling crescendo that turned the chase into a citywide obsession. On March 14, 1919, the Times-Picayune received a missive signed the Axeman, written in a florid, theatrical hand that dripped with menace. "I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell," it declared, promising to stalk New Orleans on March 19th at 15 minutes past midnight. The twist was deliciously cruel. Homes playing jazz music would be spared, a taunt that turned the city's soulful heartbeat into a shield against death. The police were blindsided, their authority mocked by a killer who turned their pursuit into a macabre game. Mooney, his jaw tight with fury, ordered every officer on duty that night, their lanterns casting eerie glows on the French Quarter's walls. Jazz poured from every window, a sultry, defiant cacophony that drowned out the city's fear. Saloons overflowed, phonographs spun, and bands played until dawn. The night passed without a murder, a fleeting resolution that left the police both relieved and humiliated. Was the letter a genuine threat, or a prank by a cunning opportunist? The Axeman's silence was his loudest taunt yet. The pursuit grew frantic as the attacks continued. Sarah Lawman in September, Mike Pepitone in October 1919. Each crime scene was a mirror of the last. A chiseled door, a bloodied axe, no fingerprints. The police tried new tactics, staking out grocery stores, interrogating Black Hand members, even consulting retired Detective John D'Antonio, who mused about a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde killer hiding in plain sight. But the Axeman was a chameleon, his identity as fluid as the Mississippi's currents. Rumors swirled of mob ties, of a killer hired to punish grocers who defied the mafia's extortion. Yet no evidence linked the murders to the Black Hand, and the police's raids on known mob haunts turned up nothing but bravado. The city's Italian community, caught between fear of the Axeman and distrust of the police, barricaded their homes, their shotguns loaded, their prayers fervent. The detectives, their uniforms soaked with sweat, chased every shadow, but the Axeman was always one step ahead, his evasion a seductive dance that left them grasping at air. The climax came not in a capture, but in the crushing realization that the Axeman was untouchable. The Giordano trial collapsed when Rosie Cortimiglia recanted, her guilt and grief unraveling her accusations. The police, their credibility battered, faced a city that no longer believed in them. The Axeman's final known attack, on Pepitone, was a brutal reminder of their failure. His skull split, his wife's screams echoing through the night. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, the Axeman vanished. No more murders bore his signature. No more letters taunted the press. The police, exhausted and defeated, scaled back their patrols, their files on the case growing dusty. The resolution was no resolution at all, just a city left to lick its wounds, its people haunted by the knowledge that the killer was still out there, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting. The Axeman had slipped through their fingers, leaving behind a legacy of fear and a city forever changed by his bloody waltz. In the sultry, jazz-drenched nights of New Orleans in 1919, the Axeman's shadow lingered like a lover's breath on the nape of the neck, both terrifying and tantalizing. The city, its heart pounding with fear and fascination, waited for the police to deliver justice, to unmask the demon who had turned their homes into slaughterhouses. But the Axeman was no ordinary killer. He was a phantom, a whisper in the dark, slipping through the fingers of a desperate police force and leaving behind a trail of blood and unanswered questions. The pursuit had been a fever dance, a chase through the humid alleys of the French Quarter and the Italian grocer shops, But as the calendar turned to October 1919, the hope of capture gave way to a chilling truth. The Axeman might never be caught. The city's obsession with him grew, a seductive, maddening pull that made every creak of a floorboard a promise of terror. This was no neat resolution, no confession to soothe the wounds, only a mystery that pulsed with the city's heartbeat, leaving New Orleans to wrestle with a darkness that refused to fade. The police, led by Superintendent Frank T. Mooney, had thrown everything at the case. Their boots had worn paths through the cobblestone streets, their lanterns casting flickering shadows as they staked out grocery stores and interrogated suspects. The Axeman's attacks, Joseph Maggio's throat slashed, Charles Cortamiglia's skull shattered, little Mary Cortamiglia's tiny body broken, had left a city screaming for answers. Yet every lead dissolved like mist over the Mississippi. The tools of 1918 were laughably inadequate. No fingerprints could be matched, no blood could be typed, no witnesses could agree on the killer's face. Was he the mulatto man Harriet Lowe had mumbled about in her delirium? A black hand enforcer settling scores? Or, as retired Detective John D'Antonio suggested, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a neighbor hiding a monstrous hunger behind a smile? The police chased every theory, their desperation a palpable heat in the humid air. But the Axeman remained a ghost, his laughter echoing in the clink of his axe. The tension built with each attack, each blood-soaked crime, seen a taunt that pushed the city to the edge. The March 1919 letter, signed the Axeman and published in the Times-Picayune, had been the crescendo, a florid, mocking promise of slaughter, tempered by a bizarre offer to spare those who played jazz. That night, New Orleans had erupted in a sultry, defiant symphony, every saloon and home blaring trumpets and saxophones, a city dancing with death to keep the devil at bay. No murders came, but the letter's shadow lingered, its words a seductive challenge that mocked the police's impotence. Was it the Axeman's voice, or a cruel hoax by a jazz musician chasing fame? The question gnawed at the detectives, their nights sleepless, their days filled with the city's cries for justice. The Italian community, their grocers targeted with chilling precision, barricaded their doors, their shotguns loaded, their prayers a desperate plea to a God who seemed to have turned away. The pursuit reached its climax in the aftermath of the final known attack on October 27, 1919, when Mike Pepitone, another Italian grocer, was butchered in his home on Scott Street. His wife, standing over his bloodied body, screamed into the night, her voice a raw, primal wail that echoed through the city. The police swarmed the scene, their lanterns illuminating a familiar horror, a chiseled door panel, a bloodied axe, no fingerprints. The Times-Picayune called it the work of a degenerate devil, and the public's fear boiled over into hysteria. Mooney, his face gaunt with exhaustion, vowed to catch the killer, but the trail was cold before it began. The police rounded up suspects, vagrants, mobsters, even a jazz clarinetist with a shady past, but none fit the Axeman's profile. The Black Hand, long suspected of orchestrating the murders, offered no clues. Their extortion rackets were real, but no evidence tied them to the axe. The city's hope for a capture, for a confession to lay the nightmare to rest, began to fray like a rope stretched too tight. Then a flicker of hope emerged, a lead that sent pulses racing. In December 1919, a woman named Esther Pepitone, Mike's widow, pointed the police toward a man named Joseph Mumford, a shadowy figure with ties to the Italian underworld. Mumford, a known Black Hand operative, had a rap sheet stained with extortion and violence. Whispers linked him to New Orleans, though he'd fled to California after Pepitone's murder. The story was tantalizing. Esther, driven by grief and vengeance, tracked Mumford to Los Angeles in 1921, confronted him, and shot him dead, claiming he was the Axeman. The police, grasping at this dramatic twist, investigated, but the evidence was thin. Mumford's criminal past was real, but no axe, no bloodied clothes, no witnesses tied him to the murders. Esther's story, fueled by pain and rage, was compelling but circumstantial, a widow's cry for closure rather than a confession. The case against Mumford dissolved, leaving the police with nothing but a city's lingering fear. The resolution, if it could be called that, was no resolution at all. After Pepitone's murder, the Axeman vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared. No more chiseled doors, No more bloodied axes. No more taunting letters. The police scaled back their patrols, their files on the case growing dusty in a precinct basement. The Italian community, scarred but resilient, began to rebuild, their grocery stores reopening, their lives reclaiming a fragile normalcy. Yet the Axeman's shadow never truly left. Every creak in the night, every flicker of a gaslight, carried his echo. Was he dead, as some claimed of Mumford? Had he fled to another city, his hunger sated or redirected? Or was he still among them, hiding behind the mask of a neighbor, a grocer, a jazz musician, waiting for the right moment to strike again? The lack of a suspect, of a confession, turned the Axeman into a myth, a boogeyman whose story was whispered in saloons and over dinner tables, a seductive, terrifying enigma that refused to be solved. New Orleans, its soul forever marked by those bloody nights, carried on, its jazz a defiant anthem against the darkness. The Axeman's mystery became part of the city's fabric, a tale told to thrill and terrify, to draw listeners closer with its unanswered questions. Did he walk among them still, his axe hidden, his eyes watching? Or had he slipped into the bayou's embrace, a demon returned to hell? The truth, like the killer himself, remained just out of reach, a tantalizing whisper that promised more secrets yet to be uncovered. For those hungry for answers, the story doesn't end here. Dive deeper into the shadows, follow the trail of blood, and join us on our channel for the next chapter of this chilling saga, where the Axeman's legacy unfolds in ways you'll never expect.